I've come up with 7 rules of engagement for teaching. And the first one is give them a reason to care. So I think it's your obligation as a teacher, as a professor, right off the bat, to convince these people that there's a reason they should give you the time of day. That's my first rule of engagement. My second rule of engagement is give them a reason to believe in you. So I don't think we should presume that we automatically have respect or that they automatically trust us, actually, to know what we're talking about. So I always have one slide in my PowerPoint presentation that's about me. Just a few little things, like, for example, my 1.89 GPA as an undergrad, and somehow I'm still a professor, you know. The fact I came here from Berkeley after 20 years, that I'm married to Kelly and we have 2 dogs. So I just spend a total of probably a minute and a half talking about myself, but it's enough to show that I'm a person with an interesting background, an unusual background, maybe something some of them can relate to more than they expected. I have a dog. They're likely to meet my dog sooner or later on campus. My third rule of engagement is I think it's always important to figure out where your audience is and then move on from that. So I think it's reasonable for me to have a notion of what a 18-year-old with an average high school background knows about biology. So I need to come into that class the first day with a pretty accurate notion of where my audience is at, where my class is at. And then my job is to meet them there, connect, and then move briskly onward so that at the end of the class we've reached some goal in terms of going beyond that. My fourth and fifth rules of engagement are related, and one of them is try to pose interesting questions, including some that you don't know the answer to. And the related one is there are no stupid questions. So I want to be teaching in such a way that the class is always having questions and wanting to know new things. And some of those new things, some of those are going to be questions I pose, either directly or by the things I present them. Some are going to be questions that they raise as a result of what we've been doing in class. And I never treat the latter as stupid. The sixth rule of engagement is actually related to that, and that's to purposely pose ambiguous questions sometimes, so that you can get a discussion going and even some disagreements about what might be the real right answer. And then my seventh rule of engagement is what I call the inverse talking rule. And that is, if you're teaching in a situation in which you want other people to talk, you should talk less. And I learned that by observation. When I first got to Berkeley as an assistant professor, I knew that eventually I'd have to teach a graduate seminar. And I knew that that somehow involves a professor and a bunch of grad students meeting once a week and reading a book together or something. But I wasn't really sure what happens next. So it just so happened during my first semester as a Berkeley assistant professor, there were 2 senior professors teaching a graduate seminar, and the same group of graduate students took each one. So I sat in on each one, and the difference in the 2 classes was stunning. In one of the classes, those students were like bumps on logs. It was excruciating trying to get them to say anything. And in the other seminar, same dozen or so grad students, yak, 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 talking all the time. And it was clear to me by the end of the semester that the reason for the difference was the professors. In the first situation, the professor was an expert on the topic, and worst of all, he brought along one of his postdocs who's also an expert on the topic. And they were mainly interested in showing off how much they knew and sort of getting feedback on their expositions of what they knew about those topics. And it just completely stifled the graduate students. In the other seminar, the professor was also an expert on the topic. And he was a friend of mine. He actually did like to talk a lot. So that impressed me all the more what he did, which is just to almost literally bite his tongue, keeping quiet. He would only break in if it was clear after 10 or 15 minutes that the students were completely going down some blind path or needed something, some mathematical issue clarified or something. But otherwise, he did not talk. And, you know, at first it took him a little bit of time to get going, but then they started talking, and because he didn't stifle them, they kept talking. And that's what leads to my inverse talking rule. If part of what you're doing is trying to get them to talk, you have to not do things that stifle them, and you have to give them the opportunity to talk. So those are my 7 rules of engagement.